Yes.
Yes.
Good. Glad to hear it. My screen shows our.
Yes.
All right. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. My screen shows our agenda. Is that what you intend, Jill?
Yes, I put that up before every meeting.
Okay.
I'll bring that down unless you'd like me to keep it up.
No, that's fine. It's just that all the people appear as postage stamps on my screen. Oh, there you. Okay. All right. Now I have a better sense of who's here. Hi, all. Again, nice to see you all. Do we have any business or discussion that we want to get to before we start down our agenda?
If I could right quick, I emailed some of you about doing a presentation on the pretrial processes work group and the work of the PSU at the task force at its meeting on October 17th. So if someone from this group can attend that meeting and give the full task force an update, I'd love to put you on the agenda as the presenter.
Jill, I'm going to mark that on my agenda. I'm writing it down so I don't forget. We got a suggestion from Dave Reynolds that John Kraus cover that. Neither of them has joined us yet. And I, rather than simply appointing them, I'd like to ask them about it and figure out if they're the appropriate people to do the report to the task force. So I promise we'll get to it by shortly before this meeting ends.
Thank you.
Yes.
Judge Garrett, both Dave and John came on.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Dave Reynolds, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, and so is John.
Oh, you are? Okay, I didn't realize. I guess you don't have your video on.
No, I don't. I'm multitasking here, so I want to be distracting everybody else.
Okay, and John Kraus, are you with us also?
Correct.
Okay. Dave suggests that John report to the task force. You know, I still think we should put this later in the meeting so that we can send John or whoever our reporter is going to be away with more specifics from this meeting. So John, you're the tentative nominee, and you'll stay that until the end of the meeting. And then if we decide differently, but you need to pay close attention during the meeting because at this point it's you. Okay?
Gotcha. Thank you.
All right. Electronic home monitoring and other monitoring recommendations from different tiers of electronic home monitoring. Do we have Bruce Van Glubt with us? I don't think we do. Okay. I must tell you all of a personal circumstance that should have nothing to do with this, but does. I just supplemented my retirement with implementing a decision to move. And so this last week, have moved all of my earthly possessions from one location in Bellingham to another. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but after 33 and a half years, it was a huge deal. And so if you see me sort of not picking up on some of the things we talked about in August, I apologize. I was just going into the really intense period then, and I've just come out. So if my memory isn't tracking, don't have long-term concerns about me, please. It's been the last couple of months. Bruce Van Glubt, I see that you're with us now. Is that right?
I am, but I'm only here for a little while. I've got a commitment I've got to leave for here at 1 o'clock. So.
Okay, well, good timing then to be having the discussion about electronic home monitoring, because you are well acquainted with that issue. We put the discussion over from the August meeting, I believe, because we weren't prepared to discuss it at August. We talked about some other things and we didn't have all of the major players with us. Let's start that discussion now. And does anybody want to take the ball and run with it on that one? Deafening silence. Okay. I have I haven't lost any possessions permanently, but many of my possessions are packed in boxes and I don't know which boxes. That includes my notes of our August meeting, which unfortunately were handwritten notes rather than electronically stored notes. So I must admit, I'm trying to recreate my memory of that meeting. I've been through many boxes, but I just haven't found my notes yet. Can any of you bring us up to speed on that topic?
Judge Dave Reynolds has his hand raised.
Oh, good. Yes, Dave.
Yeah, I don't know that we can bring it up to speed, but I've had some additional thoughts over the last couple of months, which I think this group needs to be aware of. One is our backlogging in Superior Court continues. We're having people with cases stretched out a long time. It's not for a lack of being able to get before a judge. We've had, over the past 41 weeks, we only had 13 jury trials. So our cases out there are lingering. Some of these people are continuing to commit new offenses. I don't know that I don't have a good feel from our commissioners if there's additional people they'd be letting out on EHM if that was available. We have the money available for it. I don't have a good feel as to whether or not it would be utilized more. One thing I do know is that the longer somebody's on pretrial, the more likely they are to violate that pretrial or to get in trouble again on there. So I think we'd be very mindful of that as we move forward.
What does the court have in the way of available funding?
I have about $60,000 in professional services dollars that we're sitting on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And it sounds like there are definitely people who would be appropriate candidates for EHM.
I don't know on that piece because I don't know that everybody in the community would be appropriate. There's some people don't need that level, and I'm depending on if we put them on and they don't need it, is that going to cause them to violate? Or are there people in jail who would be out otherwise? I don't have a good feel for that. I don't know if John does or not.
No, we don't either. We would have to look into it, yes.
Okay, so it sounds like EHM is not one of the options that our commissioners who are doing first appearances are holding in their arsenal of tools right now. Is that right? Yes, Judge Freeman.
That is correct. I will say that even in the last few weeks, month or so, I've seen a number of cases that I would have considered that option, given the limited jail space right now.
Okay. That's my sense of it also. And my sense of it is simply as a citizen. I haven't, talked with people at the court, but just reading the news as I read the news, I see accounts of people who've been released on terms that didn't include AHM and perhaps could have. What is it going to take for us to implement EHM as a potential? Dave, do we have any kind of relationship with Friendship Diversion Services at this point?
I have a contract with the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs who do our EHM in the Juvenile Division of Superior Court. There's no reason we can't have them on. And the adult is just making sure we have the right people on. And again, I don't have a feel for it. I mean, I know Judge Freeman mentioned there's some people he may have put on. I don't have a good feel from our commissioners what that would look like. But we could start immediately with it. And we have access to bracelets and those sorts of things. Just, coming up with how's it monitored, and, the fact that it's most of the time we're not going to know if somebody's violated until, the following day.
Sure.
Mindful of that, or the following week, depending on if it's a Friday night and they violate, we're going to get the notices, but we're not going to take any action until Monday. So we need to be mindful of that piece. I know King County ran into a situation where they thought their pretrial service was monitoring in real time with that and had 24/7 staff, and found out the hard way that wasn't the case.
Ooh. Yeah. It's really important to understand that these are not preventive.
And I think Bruce has the same situation in district court. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, but you guys don't, if something happens on Friday, you don't act until Monday, correct?
That's correct. We're in the same situation. And one thing I was going to ask you, Dave, is it your staff or is it the jail alternative program staff that actually deal directly with the defendant on installation of the device?
My probation officers do. We install it and we uninstall it. And we set the schedule and stuff and send it off to WASPIC for monitoring. So it's actually pretty easy to do.
Okay, interesting, thanks.
Judge Garrett, Stephen Gockley has his hand raised.
Yeah, hi, Stephen. Go ahead.
Thank you. EHM has been on the radar screen of this work group for, I don't know, 3 years now. I guess I'm going to express some frustration at continuing to twiddle our thumbs with this and suggest that we just start, you know, on whatever criteria we can and consider it a pilot project. Maybe Dr. Peterson could help us develop some parameters or knows of criteria we can borrow from other jurisdictions, or Bruce can advise us on that. But I mean, if we have a contract and we have some money,
Let's do it.
what the heck?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Does anybody, is there any opposition to that? Anyone want to speak against it? Yes. Hi, Carol.
Hi, not speaking against it, but I just want to echo in the strongest possible terms the concerns that Dave Reynolds mentioned. And I think it's absolutely critical that everyone involved with any implementation or any concern about a case where EHM is being used has a very, very clear understanding of what the capacity of the technology is and what it is not. And especially because I think in this county, we have different providers with different service levels. And so there are some systems that at least purport, and I understand there's some concerns about how this works out on the ground, but to be able to notify law enforcement 24/7 if the GPS device places someone in an area where they are violating a no contact order. If we're looking at a program that does not have that capacity, where someone being in such a location, it would be a report to a probation monitoring service or the pretrial unit, and there would be follow-up in a couple of weeks at a court hearing. It's just everybody needs to know that that is how it works, so that judicial officers can be making appropriate decisions about when this is a safe enough option, and also so that everyone involved with the case, especially if it's a case involving a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault or stalking or a situation like that, that people are aware of what the technology is able to do and what it's not. It just has to be crystal clear.
Absolutely. Yes, I think that's of primary importance. Let's see, we've got Dave Reynolds. Why don't you go next, and then Maya will call on you after Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a little bit of history with this, so I may be a little bit jaded with it, but having defended the county in a lawsuit regarding the death of a young child from somebody who was on electronic monitor for shoplifting, I'm very mindful of the fact we need to have a solid program in place before we just make a decision to launch. And I think we need to have, the risk pool, kind of risk pool involved and some other stuff, because there's the liability is amazing. It's incredible. We need to be very mindful of that.
Okay, and of course, everybody involved needs to, we need a system so that everyone involved in both making pretrial release decisions and implementing them is aware of precisely what this system will do and what it won't. And I'm from a risk assessment perspective, we probably need something more formal than simply a vow that will make sure everybody knows. I mean, we probably need a written policy. Dave, can you follow up with the association to look at a contract for that? And I suspect the association will have some recommendations about in-house policies about giving directives and information about the system to people who are making pretrial decisions and implementing them.
The current contract is involved. I mean, we could just piggyback, Superior Court can piggyback with the juvenile division on that. Like WASPIC will not make recommendations as to what that looks like.
I see.
They will tell us what services they can provide. They leave it to us to make that decision.
All right. Are you satisfied with the contract and procedures that the juvenile court is using
then I don't think it's any different than what most places have. We get the information and we act upon it, based on what comes in. It's just the inability to, respond immediately to something. And so we have to be very mindful of that piece. There can't be an expectation that the person violates and all of a sudden the SWAT team comes out and gets them. I think that's what the public anticipates half the time. And it's simply
Yes.
not the case.
Well, I think at the very least, if we implement electronic home monitoring as a Superior Court pretrial release option, there has to be a memo to all of the people who make decisions on first appearances. That would be all the commissioners and pro tem commissioners, and of course the judges as well, outlining precisely what the limitations of that system are. Anyway, that's a how rather than a whether, but it's an important how and one that we need to address.
And I'm definitely not opposed to EHM. I think we just be very mindful of this. I mean, it is a high liability.
And we don't want inflated expectations.
No, we don't.
Maya, you have something to add?
Thanks. I also wanted to voice concern about just expediting something in a manner that seems kind of reckless. I haven't seen the policies about who would get it, what exactly the parameters are. I'd like to see what's proposed and discuss them. Maybe we could start by looking at the juvenile policies first. Maybe those can be shared with us. Thanks.
Okay, well, yes, let's look at the juvenile policies. I don't envision a formal written policy about who's eligible for EHM and who's not. I mean, I see that as one of the many options that judicial officers making pretrial release decisions have.
Perhaps better stated is like, am I going to have a client who, because they don't have a phone, isn't going to be eligible and is going to be held on bail in lieu? I don't know, like I'm thinking about like who actually can utilize the service. And
Okay, well, I don't want to get off into too many details here, but I'm not sure that having a phone is necessarily pertains. Okay, I see that.
I'm sorry.
I see-
I'm just
yeah.
going to answer. It does sometimes. There's also GPS units which don't rely on a phone. So there's those options as well on things. What I can tell you in juvenile, we do not use it pretrial. We only use it post adjudication and for probation violations. We do not use it pretrial. We have people on pretrial release, but they're monitored in the community by probation staff. But we've never had a kid on pretrial with it.
I see. Okay, well, and this is something that our pretrial services people, Alan and John, are going to have to think about too, how the pretrial services will work in tandem with electronic home monitoring. Bruce, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm a little hesitant to bring this up because this relates to district court and not Superior Court, but it may or may not be relevant, but you should at least know. Within the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've engaged in discussions with the jail alternative program and the jail administration, and also our prosecutor's office, the civil division with Karen Frakes, about the idea of using GPS as part of our electronic equipment program, which is split pretty much 50-50 between pretrial defendants and probation violations. And it was in response to that most recent, I think, letter that came out from the sheriff's office from Bill about booking restrictions and et cetera. They were looking for some options and they were wondering about GPS. And so after quite a few discussions, and it was determined that we would not pursue that option. And it was based on concerns that the civil department had about liability with GPS. We're not a 24/7 operation. The jail alternative program is not a 24/7 operation, and they're the ones that work directly with the defendants on these devices and get the reports and forward them to us for possible court action. And we just decided, actually I didn't, the judges decided based on the feedback from Karen Frakes that the liability or I can't tell you what their decision, why they made their final decision. We're not pursuing it. But what I know was presented to them was a liability in terms of not having 24/7 response capabilities. The idea that someone could enter into a restricted zone, there's no way to notify a victim. There's no mechanism to do that. It became a very complicated liability discussion. So we're not at this point, as in district court, we're not pursuing GPS as an option. We still do use they were okay with the TAD, which is the transdermal, and the SoberLink, which is a portable breath vest. They were okay with those, but the GPS, that was the decision that was made based on everything I just had mentioned.
Okay, well, Dave Reynolds and John Kraus, obviously your review of the situation is going to include a discussion with Karen Frakes. I'm thinking that the liability issue stems primarily from inflated expectations. Because, whatever it stems from, that's something that obviously needs to include discussion with the county's legal counsel. Dave Reynolds, can you head up an effort to meet with Karen Frakes and talk with her in a discussion involving John and Alan as well as yourself?
Sure.
And you'll report back at our next meeting?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay. I really
Judge Garrett,
like
can
this.
I suggest, I want to be clear, both for Carol's concerns and Maya's concerns, that my comment was encouraging recklessness. That's not what I meant. But I do think we ought to push this. We ought to tackle these questions and not just state them and let them sit for another meeting. So I would suggest a subgroup of us. I think Dave talking to Karen is a good idea, but I think Dave and John and Maya, maybe Judge Freeman, maybe somebody from the prosecutor's office, some group of people ought to be wrestling with these concerns so that we're taking an active posture with resolving them. Maybe the answer is no, we're not going to go forward with this, like Bruce suggested in district court. But I'd like to see us actively wrestling with it in a deliberative way.
Fair enough. And I think that's a good comment. I'm going to defer discussion on your comment, Stephen, because Judge Freeman has a comment also. Dave?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Judge Garrett. First of all, I agree with Stephen that I do think we need to start taking action on this. And I don't mean in a reckless manner, but I think we should start making some progress here if we can. One question I have, maybe for Bruce, I saw this a lot in the municipal courts, and it seemed like in many courts there were risk assessments done for the use of EHM or alternatives post-conviction, but they weren't done pre-trial. Is that still the case?
It may be the case in the municipals. What I can tell you for the pretrial district court cases, that's ordered directly from the bench. There is no screening done except what a judicial officer may see and hear at the time it's ordered, but there's no formal risk assessment completed in terms of appropriateness, or are they going to, we have a lot of very high lost and damaged equipment bill that comes in. They're also with the post-conviction, the probation violations, there's no risk assessment done. That's a determination that that's an appropriate next step of sanction for a defendant. And that may be recommended by a PO or not. That it's a judicial decision in the end, but there isn't any formal kind of risk assessment done. And I would say there isn't even really any informal risk assessment done. It's based on what the perceptions of what the judicial officer is seeing from the bench in terms of appropriateness for that level of monitoring.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. part of my concern is something that Maya brought up as well, and that's just who are we targeting on with this? And I would be interested, Dave Reynolds, if there are other superior courts that are using pretrial monitoring, whether there are parameters on the use of it and what groups we're targeting with it. And additionally, whether we can reduce some of our risk as well by using some sort of risk assessment.
Yeah, I can reach out to the other superior court pretrial units and see what they're doing as well.
All right.
I wonder too if Dr. Peterson knows of anything like that, because the other problem lurking here is if it's just subjective decisions by the judicial officers, with all due respect, that's the right soil for racial disparities as well. We know that. That's why we're doing a formalized pretrial risk assessment in the first place. So if there are tools that can help make those decisions, if we're going to make them, it would be useful to explore those as well.
Which actually links into a question I had for Dr. Peterson, which is about the potential for assessing this is theoretical at this point, if we were to go to using electronic home monitoring, could we factor that into, my question was going to be what the results are statistically, what the results are, and rather than into a risk assessment tool itself, but whether it's in the risk assessment tool or otherwise, there also could be standards for applying electronic home monitoring. What I don't want to do is get into too formal a situation, because I want judicial officers to have some discretion there. But you're right, Stephen, that full-throated discretion can be a recipe for inequity. And so anyway, back to my original question, which was for you, Dr. Peterson, and about your views on this, how you've seen it work in other jurisdictions, and whether there's a way for us to keep track statistically of how it's working out if we go with EHM.
Sure. So I have to admit, I'm not an expert on electronic home monitoring. I have seen some studies. I don't recall seeing any that definitively said it worked or improved outcomes. But I will go back and dig through the literature and see what I can find, if there's anything I may have missed, and likely have missed over the recent years. Let's see. The other question was about working it into conditions. I mean, I think that's a local decision that you will have to work out as best for you in your organization, in your county. It's certainly possible. I mean, I know other counties do it, so it's not outside of the realm. Yeah, I think it's ultimately just a local decision. Research-wise, I'll dig up what I can and get back to you on that.
All right, thank you. Other comments? Okay, we're putting off discussion again until the next meeting, but I want to channel Stephen for a moment and say that we should expedite this. We should look into this and see whether EHM is going to be doable, and if so, under what circumstances. If it's not, let's find that out so we don't spin our wheels on it. If it is, let's find that out so we can go ahead and implement it, because the time is definitely right. So at the next meeting, we'll be looking to Dave Reynolds for an assessment and hopefully a copy maybe of the contract with the Sheriff's Association. The contract, it's a longer word than that, the Law Enforcement Association that you described. And we're looking to you for results of discussion with the county's legal counsel about the liability issues, and how, not just what the liability issues are, but whether there are ways to address them. If the liability stems from inflated expectations, is there a way we can address expectations so that everyone involved knows precisely what the limitations are. I'm giving you those two assignments, and you're ready to run with those balls?
Yeah, I can take care of that.
Okay. And then Dr. Peterson, we'll be looking to you for more information, as you described, about how other counties do this, and what information you get in your inquiries.
Yeah, and I'll send that to Jill, and then she can disseminate it through the group.
Okay, good. Other comments on EHM before we leave this agenda item? Maya, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I mean, I'm interested in knowing the hows and the nuts and bolts, but I'm hoping someone has the task of like looking at the efficacy, and before we put these additional obligations on people accused in the criminal legal system, I'd like to hear that it in fact has an impact on on appearance or recidivism or something like Dr. Peterson saying he hasn't seen research that demonstrates that. I am concerned about adding obligations when there's no payback. And I really want to be convinced that it's going to do something before we saddle people with this.
All right. Well, I think we're starting down that road with the information Dr. Peterson will be gathering in discussions with the other counties. I mean, ultimately, we may need to utilize it before we find out how useful it is. You know, when the jail is full, EHM is an alternative to letting somebody out pretrial without that restriction. And when the jail is not full, EHM is often an alternative to jail. So it works both ways. Let's find out what others' experience has been. Okay? All right. Anything else on EHM for now? Okay, discussion to be continued to our next meeting. Presumably you've read the emails that Maya, Daniel, and Dave Graham have exchanged on the subject of violent crime and how we define violent crime for purposes of our pretrial risk assessments. I guess not surprisingly, Dave would define it more expansively than Maya would. And Maya and Dave, why don't you each give a synopsis of your position on the issue, and then we'll open it to discussion. Basically, what we're doing here in this committee is coming up with a recommendation about how that term will be defined. As always, the ultimate decision is not ours as a committee, it's the judiciary. So our recommendations go to the Superior Court judges who are trusting us to look at the process carefully and with information and objectivity. Dave, why don't you start by discussing and summarizing your position, and then we'll ask Maya to do the same.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not asking to be expanded. I'm just asking it stay the way the state of Washington has defined it right now. I think they've done a good job of the definition. And to be honest, looking at it, probably should be adopted by the court rules, because we really struggle with the court rules. That, again, the definition of violent crime for pretrial, one excludes anything from the RCW. So it's obviously more expansive than what the RCW calls for it, but it never really gives the definition. And this is the perfect definition. I understand Maya's proposal is to just adopt what the sentencing guidelines are, but I think that's sort of apple to oranges, that we're comparing someone post-trial to pretrial. And since the pretrial rules and the criminal rules kind of leave open and specifically state that you shouldn't adopt, the RCW definition, I think the one proposed by I think it's the Washington State pretrial, is probably the best one that I've seen. I've actually started using it on my arguments for bail because it's the best definition of it. And tangentially, it would help us for stats, because again, if we're messing around with our definitions and making them less than other counties and other states, it would sort of skew our numbers that we're not accurately defining what a violent crime is pre-trial.
Thanks. And Maya, your view?
Thanks. And I understood Dave's argument about the following the pretrial rule rather than the SRA. I mean, but I look at this list and I don't know, like assault in the 4th degree is on here and it's like, that's a misdemeanor. Do we really think that should be treated the same as a violent offense as a assault in the 1st degree or an assault in the 2nd degree? So I think there are some flaws in this list. That one stands out to me. And like, what do you think about that, Dave?
Well, it's interesting because we always bring up, I mean, both sides, if there's assault force on someone's record pre-trial. Defense brings it up that there's no assaultive behavior in the past as a reason for PR. We bring it up. So I think that's why it's on there. Yeah, obviously it's assault 1's different than an assault 4, but it is interesting that we do already sort of take those into account when we're arguing our bail. I mean, in both sides. I mean, a lot of times, defense argues, say there's no assaultive behavior, there's no threats, there's nothing like that. It's all property crime. And our counter is, if there is some or not. So yes, there's a huge.
But we also
difference
distinguish between felony convictions and misdemeanor convictions. If someone has an assault 4 on their record, then I'm going to say they have no felony convictions or no felony assaultive convictions. And there is a difference. There's a big difference, and I don't know if that isn't accounted for in this list. But I mean, beyond that, I mean, I've looked through this. I mean, I do not, although subversive activities made a felony, and I looked at the elements and I'm like, I don't know that if we're going to parse it, if I really think that is a violent offense. But then I'm like, look, how many times have I ever seen that? Never. So I mean, I don't want to go down some obscure rabbit holes where we're arguing about. I mean, the assault 4 is the one that leaps out to me as one that I don't think should be included as a violent offense. But that's the only one I really have a huge issue with.
All right. Other input?
Judge Garrett, you referenced email exchanges that Dave and Maya had. I took a quick look and I don't see having received anything like that. Jill, do you recall that?
Yes, I'm not going to forward those around though, because I don't want to inadvertently cause an Oakland Public Meetings Act violation. So I recommended to Maya and to Dave that basically we have that conversation here in the meeting. I can read those definitions for you if you like.
I mean, I can briefly reiterate what I said, which was that months ago, I looked all these up and figured out which ones under the SRA were deemed violent offenses and which are non-violent offenses under the SRA. And my position was that we should follow that guidance and for non-violent offenses, not include them on this list. Then Dave responded.
Just the pretrial rules specifically state that you don't have to consider ones from the RCW and that it's pretty much open. And so I didn't feel that just using the SRA made any sense because it's a post-trial versus a pretrial.
Okay, I think I got it. Thank you both.
Okay. Do you have a hand up, Carol?
Oh, I do. I guess I just wanted to say it does seem significant that we use the PSA in the same way that other jurisdictions are using the PSA so that we have access to statistical information from other jurisdictions and that our information here is also valid and available and part of the whole picture of improving this tool. So I'd be reluctant to deviate from what is established for this tool.
Well, that makes sense, but is the PSA established for this tool? Yes.
Judge Garrett, I'll just say that I know that Thurston and Pierce counties have each devised their own list that, there's slight variances here and there, but they're not uniform by any means.
Could we see their lists and note how they differ?
I'll ask, yeah, sure.
That would
See
be
if I can-
really helpful.
Of course, sure. And I'll see, I can reach out to Yakima too, because I know since they've been using it, maybe they have a list as well.
Where is that definition from then, Andrew? Is that from like the state?
It actually came from, I think, Arnold Ventures.
Okay.
And
So-
it might have actually, that may be the list that they devised with Yakima, since Yakima was the first place to use it in Washington. But I can double check on that.
Yeah. Because actually it was a very helpful definition. It'd be great to have that in the criminal rules, you know, have a specific definition what a violent crime is.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
would. It would. All right, once again, if we don't have further comment, then we're going to put this issue on to our next meeting also pending information from Dr. Peterson. Looks like our next meeting is going to involve some decisions. I hope so. All right, anything else on the violent crimes issue before we move to the next one on our agenda?
Could I just ask, and this is really a question coming from lack of knowledge, but Dave said a couple times that it ought to be put in the rules. And Whatcom County is on a number of these issues, sort of on the lead edge of these things. Is that an effort we might want to consider spearheading somehow?
Well, it's under the court rules. It's under 3.2. So it's devised by Superior Court. It's not our local rules or anything.
Right,
It's just
right.
the blanket court rules that Supreme Court does. And yeah,
But you can petition for changes in the rules and stuff like
But
that.
Yeah.
the rule's broad and I think appropriate. It says you follow those defined by the SRA as violent, but that's not all inclusive and it can be broader. So I think the intention is things can come up, so you want to leave some flexibility.
Okay,
But sure, I don't think there's any need to ask the Supreme Court to change their rule.
I'd love to.
Okay, on that, we're going to move to the next agenda item. And that gives the stage to you, Dr. Peterson, to talk about performance ranking and related issues.
Sure, thank you very much, Judge Garrett. Let me disappear 1 second, share my screen. So you may remember this list that we came up with a couple months ago. Just looking at the performance measures and the descriptions. We have, let's see, sorry. Yeah, I have to move windows of people. Okay, so you can see on the right there, or they may be blocked by pictures of everybody, but if so, please move that. So you can see on the right, there's the average score for each of those elements. And I think we're still waiting for a couple from judge scores or commissioner scores to get back. But I decided that there's no need to continue to wait to start to do the mapping of where these things come from. So yeah, we've come up with what data elements would be required for each of these in order to come up with the calculation, right? So if it's percentage, you have to figure out, what your numerator and denominator are, that kind of thing. Or if it's a date range, beginning and end date. And so there are a couple items I think in there that I just want to get agreement from the group. Make sure that I'm defining these things, or in my head, the definition is the same as you perceive them. So I'll probably send those around early next week. I think that for the majority of them, I have a good sense of where this data would live if it does exist. But this is on me. I've just been, because of other responsibilities, slow to get to mapping all this, but I have sent out requests to John just very recently, so I didn't expect him to have an answer yet, to John and to Lieutenant Erickson, John Kraus and Lieutenant Erickson, just to talk with them briefly and confirm that yes, they have this data, or no, they don't, and make sure we know, what kind of format we can have it, so we can bring these together easily and do the calculations. So I'm hoping by the end of next week, I'll have a good sense of where all this data lives and what it would take to get everything together. And then, we can start to do some trials and see, based on maybe the last year, what we have or something like that. Yeah, so that's what I have right now. So like I said, look for early next week, something that I'll send to Jill again to disseminate, just making sure that, I'm understanding things the same way you would define them. And please let me know if there are disagreements so we can talk about that further. But otherwise, by the end of next week, like I said, I hope to have something a little more firm. And then we can start to, maybe by next meeting, have something to report. Judge Freeman, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to check with you, Dr. Peterson. Did you receive any additional responses directly to you? Okay, I have at least one in my inbox, but
Oh,
I wasn't sure whether they were sending them directly to you, so.
Sure, no problem. Yeah,
Okay.
please forward that out when you get a chance,
Yeah.
and I'll include it in there. I don't expect things to change dramatically because we already have, 8 to 10 responses. But it's just good to make sure that all voices are in there if we can. And the other good news is, there were no elements that were a 3, and if you remember a 3 being, we don't need to worry about that. That kind of, this doesn't need to be reported. So everything in there was either a 1 or a 2. 1 being that must be reported, and 2 being we want that reported, assuming we have it.
All right. Okay, to be continued, but it looks to me from just looking at that list quickly that most of the sources of information are accessible at this point.
Yeah, just what you get. That's the same impression I have.
Yeah, good.
There are a couple that are questionable, but we'll see. Then John or they might be captured in the jail.
All right. Anybody have anything to add on that discussion? Okay. Then we have the report to the task force, and Dave Reynolds, you volunteered, John Kraus. I'm happy to report to the task force as well. I think our report would be a summary of what we've done at this meeting, which actually encapsulates more than this meeting because we've come up to date on a couple of topics from earlier. Other information we should be giving to the task force? That's a question for everybody, not just Dave Reynolds.
I'd recommend it, John, because he has the boots on the ground numbers and stuff about cases have been assigned and types of people he's seen, and are there ways that we could increase the number of people in pretrial?
John, are you comfortable with A, doing that, and B, adding to that a summary of our discussion today, looking further into EHM and the issues involved there?
Yeah, that's no problem. Jill will probably send around a recap of the meeting, and a lot of that can be, I can bring up and, summarize it on that Monday morning maybe.
Okay. All right. I'm going to leave it to John, but let you know that if you need anything from me, including being there, my schedule is open for that time, so I could do that. If you're comfortable going ahead, just go ahead and let us know if there are any questions or problems.
Okay.
All right. That's the last item on our formal agenda, and we should, I think, all be pleased with ourselves for finishing this meeting well in advance of our 1:30 stop time. But let me just ask the group, is there anything else that bears discussion at this point?
Yeah, one other point, Judge Garrett, and I'll ask Jill for confirmation here. The task force actually probably is looking for 2 kinds of reports coming out of this group. One is what we've just assigned to John on the progress of the pretrial processes work group itself. The other is, it's been a long time since the task force has had any reports on sort of case flow and the status of the different courts. And so, Dave mentioned how many trials in the last how many months, which is sort of getting at it. We hear anecdotally about backlogs or lessening backlogs, but some kind of data indication of where each of the courts stand. And I think we're going to be asking Bruce for district court and Darlene and Raylene for municipal courts. So I don't know if Dave Reynolds, that would be you, or maybe Judge Freeman, or somebody who could give the task force an indication of how the flow of cases, the conduct of trials, both in terms of numbers and logistical barriers that are still existing. That kind of report would also be something the task force would be looking for too. So I doubt that's John to report on that. But that is part of the request I think the task force has. Jill, am I on target with that?
You're close enough. Those are two separate agenda items for the task force. In fact, one agenda item is for the pretrial updates. The second agenda item is for the status of court proceedings. And I have reached out to all the court administrators and folks to ask them to be prepared to give updates on both of those agenda items.
Okay, so that would involve Dave Reynolds attending and reporting to the task force.
Yes, Dave is a member of the task force, as is Bruce. Darlene Peterson with City of Bellingham, Raylene for Blaine and the small cities. So they'll all be hopefully prepared to give those updates.
Okay, so Dave Reynolds, you're on board with that and planning to report in that way about the sort of big picture Superior Court?
Yeah, can you remember the date of that?
October 17th, which is a Monday at 9 o'clock, right, Jill?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm prepared.
Great. Okay, so
That's a relief.
John,
I had gotten that email as well, and I will likely be in trial on that day at 9 o'clock. So the one thing I did want to bring up is both case flow. We just pulled numbers, and Dave Reynolds, I'm sure you have that was pulled by Judge Olson when it came to how many jury trials have gone out in the last year and the availability of courtroom space. But I also think that we should touch on some of the local court rules that were changed this year as well to address some of that, like adding a more meaningful omnibus calendar.
Dave, will you also talk about the numbers of filings this year as opposed to other years?
Yeah, I can get those numbers. How far back do you want me to go?
It'd be interesting to see a little bit before COVID, through
Okay.
COVID, and now. I think that would be most revealing, probably.
Okay.
okay.
I raised my hand just to ask for a reminder of when this work group meets again. Sorry.
That's okay. This work group meets again. I had just had that pulled up a minute ago, Maya. December 2nd is the next meeting.
And that's the first Friday in December, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Jill, is that at 12:30 again?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Everybody clear on their individual assignments coming out of this meeting? And any further input from anybody? All right, any objection to my closing the meeting at this point? Okay, that ends our meeting. Thanks to all of you. Good to see you.